here. So we've got a good group of folks here. And I think we can go ahead and get started. And I believe that we will have some other folks kind of jumping in as we go along, but we'll just keep moving because we have a lot of information that I think is really important and worth digging into here today. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Tracey, Carey. I'm the Executive Director of Midwest Urban Strategies. If you've been able to join us for these Zoominars in the past, you know that we are working through a series of planned discussions around topics that are important to us as workforce development professionals, and looking to structure this in a way that is a little bit different than sort of your traditional webinar. We want to make sure that there's room for conversation, but we will save that for the end. You can use your chat box to pose your questions, and we will make sure to get through those and leave ample time for conversation at the end of this call. In addition to creating a conversation, we're also planning to create a toolkit that we'll use as a takeaway from here. We'll talk more about that at the end of the conversation today. So today we're going to focus on the job training. And we know that as workforce development professionals, oftentimes the tools that we have in our toolkit can seem challenging to apply in the world of red tape that we exist in. So we wanted to unpack it just a little bit and talk about some of the experiences that some of our peers have had with using this tool and how they've done so effectively, and how this OJT tool has been beneficial in helping to develop skilled workers across a number of different industries and occupations. So just real briefly, a few housekeeping items. We do want to make sure we're cultivating a conversation here, but we did want to make sure that our presenters had good time. So use that chat box as questions come up, pose them there, and that way you won't have to worry about forgetting them, and we will make sure to circle back to you. You as participants in this session, you will be muted while the presentation is going on and the presenters are speaking. If you need to speak to ask a question that is really pressing for you, you can raise your hand, and Amber will be watching the chat box as well as checking to see if anybody has raised their hand, and she will help us to manage that process. So with that said, I wanted to take a few moments to introduce our speakers. Each one of them comes to us with their own experience and knowledge about their work in the public workforce system, as well as the use of this tool called the job training. So they're here to share their expertise and have a dialogue with us today. So first up, we have Rachel, and I'm going to butcher your name, Rachel.
Merfalen.
There we go. She is the Director of Business Services at the San Diego Workforce Partnership. I'm going to allow Rachel to do a brief introduction about her own experience and background, and then we'll continue on down the line.
Hi, everyone. And thank you, Tracey. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Rachel. I'm the Director of Business Services, and my colleague Shaina is with me on the line here today as well. And I started the Workforce Partnership and really in workforce in general in February of this year, right before we had to pivot to serve a very new kind of workforce need due to COVID. And in my role as the Business Services Director, I direct all the workforce facing programs for businesses. And so I'm really looking at things from a business standpoint. And one of the things that has helped that we were able to collaborate with this year, and we'll share more about it later, is looking at how we can utilize on the job training with sort of employer cohorts when I identify a need that employers have that is not just single to one individual employer. And that's one of the strategies we use for a COVID recovery program called High Road Kitchens, we'll chat about later. I have a background as a business owner, not a background in workforce, and so I think brings some different perspectives to it. And I'm still learning about our WAOA system and workforce, but it's a fascinating place to look at how have we done things and then how can we do things differently.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. We're glad to have you here. And next up is your colleague from San Diego Workforce Partnership, Shaina Gross. Shaina?
Hey everybody, thanks Tracey, and thanks for joining us. I'm Shaina Gross, I'm the Director of Programs at the San Diego Workforce Partnership. And my role is really to oversee the WIOA funds that come into our region for youth, adults, dislocated workers, the career centers that we have, the American Job Centers, as well as a few special projects that we do around justice involved, folks that are receiving public benefits, CalWorks in our world, welfare to work programs, as well as people that are on disability. Similar to Rachel, I don't have a big background in workforce development, and I started at the partnership in March. Although I worked at the United Way for 11 years, where we worked on the intersections of education, income, and health. And so certainly all of those social determinants show up today as we work with job seekers to be able to find wherever their next move is for their next job, their career path, whatever it may be, and all of the challenges that they face. And I think OJT training is one of those things that can really give you a leg up, a step up, and an opportunity to get your foot in the door with an employer on that pathway to a career. So I'm excited to talk today about some of the creative things that we've put in place in San Diego. Thanks.
Thanks, Shaina. We look forward to hearing more about the great work that you guys are doing in San Diego and some of the best practices that you're learning as you move along. So next up, we have Jack Mills from Partner for Work in Pittsburgh. Jack?
Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm so glad to be here with the folks on this. My experience is that everybody has a lot of lessons to share, and so I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'm the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at Partner for Work, so that means that I have responsibility for our industry partnerships and also our fundraising and also our interaction with unions and labor management partnerships, labor in general. My background with workforce development really is from the point of view of industry partnerships. And for a while, I was the director of something called the National Network of Sector Partners, when we started out with about as many industry partnerships as you could count on two hands, and ended up with thousands of them after WIOA was passed. So I bring that lens to all the work with the Workforce Board.
Thank you, Jack. And then last but certainly not least, we have Shelley Penn. And Shelley, were you also going to make the introduction of Rowena as well? You're muted, Shelley.
See, I need Rowena to help me with this Zoom. But my name is Shelley Penn, and I am with the Full Employment Council. We manage 2 workforce boards. Most people would see us as a social service agency. I would classify us as a business with a social conscience. I've always been on the business side of the ledger. I've been doing job development business services for a little over 28 years. My boss recruited me from the 3rd grade. So you talk about OJT, I've been able to earn and learn for quite some time now. So with that being said, we do have our business services director, Rowena Bierman, on the screen. I don't know if you can see her, but my job is to really develop out the scopes of all of the initiatives that we operate to execute and to most definitely exceed goals in any and every initiative that we organize and manage. So Rowena, she's been with us a little over 14 years. Rowena, is that correct?
17.
17, wow.
It seems like yes.
Dating ourselves, but Rowena is our business services director. And just to give you a little bit about our business services team, there are approximately 20 what we call workforce development executives. I serve as the sort of the co-director with Rowena. but our teams are broken into 4 that focuses on 4 different areas, and then also sectors. And so, Rowena, you want to give a little introduction about yourself and what you do?
Sure. A lot of my focus is basically engaging with the different industries and sectors in our region to make sure that they're aware of our services, as well as we bring intelligence back to the agency as far as what the business and industry is doing on a local level here, which I'm sure Shelley's going to cover in her presentation. So most of my time is spent with the companies, associations, EDCs, chambers, those type of entities.
Intermediaries.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Shelley and Ro. We are glad to have all of our panelists, speakers here today. And so just really looking forward to the conversation. So I think that, you know, we would all on this call agree that when we're thinking about the tools in our toolkits, there are some of those tools or resources that we find easier to use, and some that we have some reservations about. And for a variety of reasons, many of us have experienced a level of uncomfortableness when we're thinking about implementing on the job training for the first time. And so some of that comes from not knowing quite how to talk with our business partners about it. Some of it comes from wanting to be certain that we are following the regulatory guidance in WIOA that governs the use of that tool. And some of it comes from just wanting to make sure that our job seekers are having a good experience and they're getting the most out of the resource that we're able to offer them. So, you know, working through that can be a cumbersome process to get to a positive outcome. But the folks who are here today to talk with us have really got a great history and experience in using this tool, and they're going to share that experience with us today. And the hope is that we can go back to our own communities and think about how we can apply on the job training as a tool. And, you know, we don't want to use a hammer to repair glass. So we want to apply it in the right environment. For the folks who are presenting today, what would you say is one of the things that you would want our participants to take away after our conversation today about on the job training as a tool or resource? And Shelley, I'll start with you and work my way backwards.
I would say that we should look at business services as just that, a service. When we approach employers, we come from the perspective that we can be an extension of their HR system. And so the services are what we sell, you know, the recruitment, the testing, the assessment, and then, oh, by the way, 50% of your cost to train this individual is also available. So I think leading in with the services, the upfront human resource activity, and then complementing it with the reimbursements, that's just the added bonus. And so when we go out, it's never to sell an OJT, it's mostly to sell the services of the Career Center.
That's great, Shelley. That's really good framing. Shaina, what would you say in terms of the takeaway?
I think that when we started this project, which again you'll hear about in a little bit, there was a lot of, well, we haven't done that before, or we haven't done it that way before, or that's not how our policy is written. So just remembering, we wrote the policy, we can change the policy, we can do things outside of the box. Just because we haven't done it before doesn't mean we can't push and explore how we might do it differently.
That's great. Thank you. And Rachel?
Yeah, from my experience, I think from a business facing side, we've also been dealing with a lot of businesses who they almost take on a why do I want to bother? This looks like way too much work standpoint. And so for me, it's twofold. It's one, how are you setting that business up for success? success? How are you making this process easy for the business? And are there steps that we can take internally to sort of shield the business from the bureaucracy of the process or the many steps that have to happen? And then the other side of that is, what is the language we're actually using to communicate with the businesses? They don't care about a term called WIOA or an OJT. And so how are we using real language with our business partners to talk about, instead of like a wage subsidy, it's like just real language. We're going to pay for your employee, like 50% of your employee's paycheck, for the next X number of weeks. And so kind of getting out of the workforce world or the jargon of the language that we're used to, and then using real language with businesses.
That's great, Rachel. Thank you. And then Jack, what's the takeaway that you're hoping folks have?
I'd say two things. One is that not all employers are the same. And so you can think of OJT as a tool to achieve the goals of your workforce board, be they make it possible for people who otherwise wouldn't be able to get jobs to get them, or be they to provide jobs that have really good compensation and possibilities for advancement. So thinking that through gets you to the question of which employers do you really want to work with. The second thing is that internally, at least the way we do it, OJT is a team sport. And that's, probably the way it works most places. I think the challenge there is it can take time to work through the process from one part of the team to the other part of the team. And so really thinking carefully about how you boil time out of that process is helpful.
That's great. So I hope everybody got that in their notes of the key takeaways here, and that you're starting to think about what it is that you hope you get out of this session and what your next steps might look like. So I'm going to spend just a really brief amount of time with a description about what OJTs are before we actually launch into how do we use them, because really it is the how do we use them that matters the most. And Shaina, I agree. I love it's a team sport. I think that's great. So OJTs are structured in the WIOA legislation. It tells us what that means in the law. And so, we can go to that document that describes all of the components and requirements, or we can simply understand that the point of WIOA is to partner with employers to bring workers on and to support their efforts, as Shelley indicated earlier, sort of be that extension of their HR to help them with sourcing talent and share the risk of that sourcing using this tool called OJT, which allows us to reimburse employers inside of a contract that both entities would sign that lays out the training plan and the agreement on the employer side of what sort of supports they're going to give. In the registered apprenticeship world, on-the-job training is known as on-the-job learning. So they share characteristics. And the goal of this is to help to onboard and prepare entry-level workers into new occupations that helps them get the skills that they need. On-the-job training can also be used to develop the skills of current workers as well. And each local board sets its own policies around OJT. Those policies must at least adhere to the WIOA regulations. They could be more aggressive if they want to be more aggressive. Aggressive oftentimes means can result in more restrictive, but that's it on OJTs. I think we all know sort of the basics of what an OJT is. The scary thing is, how do you apply it? Again, we wouldn't use a hammer to fix a mirror. So the group here is going to share a little bit about how they have thought about and used this tool to appropriately connect job seekers into opportunities that will help them to grow in their career pathways. So next up, we're going to take a look at the work that's happening in San Diego. And as Rachel and Shaina had hinted at. They're going to talk a bit about the High Roads Kitchen, which has been a response to COVID and some of the challenges that have happened across the country, really, but most specifically for them with this initiative in San Diego. So with that, I will hand it over to our San Diego team.
Thanks, Tracey. I'll kick it off, and then Shaina is a great resource when we come to some of the things as well. A brief overview of the High Road Kitchens program. In the wake of COVID-19, we, as well as I'm sure everyone across the country, were dealing with a lot of people who were unemployed. Restaurants were closed for us in San Diego to takeout only. And we partnered with a local restaurant. He's a restaurant manager, but he's also the national director of a group called the One Fair Wage. And it's committed to equity and pay equity, racial equity in the restaurant industry, and which is one of the reasons we titled this program High Road Kitchens. And these were employers, restaurateurs who wanted to take the high road with employment practices. And we wanted to support those businesses in San Diego with our limited resources, because we realized we couldn't serve all businesses. And so how are we supporting the ones who are building more equity into their workplace practices? So what this essentially was is an initiative for restaurants to get workers back to work who had been laid off or their hours reduced or furloughed. Lena, no, I'm not referring to the Restaurant Opportunity Center, but we can get to that later. And so it was a chance to partner with these restaurants who wanted to bring workers back to work. They also had a food sharing portion of their program. So customers from our community could purchase a meal and then donate a meal to food insecure workers and others from the restaurant industry, or whether they were first responders. And the OJT portion was bringing these employees back to work and then training around new COVID-19 protocols for food handling, customer queuing, and how to process some of those orders for this new takeout environment. And there are a couple of things I think that led to success of this program. And we've had, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we've had 17 restaurants so far. We've served quite a few, I think thousands of meals. And Shaina, you might have a more specific number on the top of your head. I think we've brought back 20 to 30 workers through the program. I can find those numbers in a minute and bring them up. I have like it on a slide somewhere. And it was not easy to set up though. And this is, we had to do a couple of things in order to make this happen. Number one, we had to issue some changes to our internal policies. We had an unlikely to return policy, as well as an on-the-job training policy that were internal to us that we had to make changes to, because technically we were bringing back workers as opposed to hiring new employees. And yet we had the ability to do that and to pivot and to include those who had been laid off due to COVID-19 were considered dislocated workers. And so we were able to do that to bring those employees back to work. We had a hard time recruiting restaurants for this. And that was one of the key parts to our success is we had 2 restaurant champions that were willing to pilot this program with us and work through that process. Jack, I also wrote that down, like OJT is a team sport, and we really experienced that because it took a lot of us working together to try to figure out sort of this new process. And something that we had to accelerate it as well, because it didn't make any sense for this to take sort of a long time. And we were going through a lot of transition, which Shaina can talk to about. All of our job centers were going online as opposed to in person. And so it was a very stressful environment. But having that one employer partner to work with us to work out the kinks and then give us feedback on this is the burdensome part of this process that we need to work on, and this is the part that's really easy and how I can communicate to my peers in the restaurant industry. And so that informed also our messaging to other restaurants. And some of the things that came out of that you can see on the screen is we ended up creating sort of a standardized template training plan that could be used for every restaurant that they could then just customize. They start with the bones of it, and then they could customize according to their operations, but they didn't have to write training plans from scratch. And that significantly reduced the lift for the restaurants as well as for the BSRs who are managing through that process. We also leveraged some philanthropic funding. We had a grant from the San Diego Foundation, and that really provided an incentive for businesses to get started and up and running. And the San Diego Foundation provided $5,000 per business to help with the food startup costs. When a restaurant shuts down, there's a lot of spoilage from their food, and to start up again, it's almost like it can be thousands of dollars to bring some of those fresh ingredients back into their restaurant. One of the things that we dealt with was this, there was restaurant fatigue. And so all of our restaurateurs were applying for EIDL and for PPP and all these different programs for COVID supportive services. And we actually had a hard time recruiting some restaurants to come and be part of this process. We're trying to serve workers. We're trying to increase our use of OJTs and these training dollars that needed to be spent by the end of the year. And it was hard to have some of those restaurateurs consider whether it's worth it or not. And so that philanthropic funding, plus having a pathway for them, plus having some of those templates in place, and having sort of a real language communication strategy with them, all helped shepherd them through the process. And then we had to work very closely with our internal teams to make sure that we were being responsive and working through some of their concerns as well. I'm going to pause there for a minute and see, Shaina, if you'd like to add anything from your perspective, and if there are any questions or anywhere you want me to focus on or dive into.
Sure. So just a couple thoughts. One, I think you mentioned it at the beginning, but just in case, the restaurants that we're working with are all committed as part of the One Fair Wage, committed to these certain levels and bars. Did you mention that part, Rachel? Did I miss that?
I did. I didn't go into a lot of detail, but they were required to sign a racial and wage equity toolkit, which committed them to going through some trainings that inform and help them understand some of the inequities in terms of hiring and promotion within the restaurant industry, which is really shocking when you actually look at some of those numbers. Most of the restaurants that initially participated were already committed to some of those things, but having that commitment was really key, because we wanted to ensure that if we were investing in businesses during COVID, we were investing in those who are going to come out stronger and provide a better employment environment and better opportunities for workers in the post-COVID economy. We knew a lot of restaurants weren't going to make it, so we wanted to help the ones that were doing the good work to do that.
And I think that's important, because we're really trying to align, while OJT can be challenging and you would think we should just open it up to anybody that wants to do it because we're eager to have anybody, we really are trying to align our investments and our training investments in quality jobs. And so that was one of the benchmarks we used. A couple other things was, talking about the team sport, it just rang so true, because I feel like we outlined all of the steps that had to happen and who was going to do which piece, and really delineated where will the business services team pick up and leave off, and where will our AJC operator pick up and leave off. And that shifted, those responsibilities shifted, as well as we got a few under our belt and saw who was better at what. We really, our business services team it was important for us to have the interaction with the employer so that they had a really positive experience. The AJC operator maybe had less of an urgency around that. And so we wanted, we ended up shifting some duties where we could do a little more hand holding with the employer in the beginning, even helping to fill out paperwork, as Rachel mentioned. The other thing around the policies, so first, our unlikely to return policy only talked about natural disasters. So we had to update that, and we added a public health disaster in there. No one could foresee COVID, and so it wasn't in any of our plans. And so we just had to change some language where the intention was there, but the actual language wasn't there. So really updating the policy there. And to be able to do OJTs with currently employed workers who meet the adult and dislocated worker eligibility because they had gotten notice of an impending layoff. But previously, we hadn't done that. We hadn't done OJTs with an incumbent worker. So that was a change we had to make. And then the other thing that we had to change was just our ability to sort of go all in on this project. And that meant working with our finance team to have them allow us to encumber funds and even over encumber funds across a program year, so that when we started this in March, we didn't have to end, as of June, say, sorry, we can't take anybody else until we get our next program allocation. We had set aside a pot of funds that were going to be dedicated to this. And just because we hadn't used them yet, that didn't mean they went away or they went back into the pot, and so we had to really work with our finance team to allow us to do that. And even to say, yes, we put aside, say, 150,000. We're going to keep enrolling people because we know someone will drop out. We may have 200,000 of commitments, and that made people very nervous. But we knew we'd also get another allocation coming up in the next program year, and we were committed to that. So there were just some internal things, we hadn't done that before. We hadn't over encumbered or crossed program years. So I think those are the main things that I would add.
Thanks, Shaina. And I'll follow up with one other thing too. The last bullet point here we wanted to call out is that technically these were, I guess, what we call reverse referrals. And so we were working with a business. They already had displaced employees they wanted to bring back to work. We dealt with a few challenges there. One, some of the restaurants and or some of the employees weren't super excited about asking about some of the information for WIO eligibility. And so we had to navigate that a little bit and help them understand that the funding followed the individual as opposed to the business. And that was an intentional communication strategy we had to engage in. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is that this was a really great use case for us in a pilot. And as we've moved into this program year, we're thinking about how can we serve our participants, not using a reverse referral model, but still using sort of like an employer cohort model. Because what that did for us is we did a lot of work to set this up. And so then we wanted to build some efficiency into our process as well. And we, once you pilot with one or two businesses, it's a lot easier to then scale that when you're dealing with a similar business that has a similar need and a similar kind of employee need as well. And so, I'm not going to say anything yet because nothing's official, but we're working on exploring other kinds of options where we can say, we want to serve, say, this segment of job seekers that's dislocated, whether they were laid off from the airlines or they're from the hospitality industry and they're part of our job seeker caseload. Where can we find a parallel business need in the community where they're hiring new workers and they need that kind of talent? And then instead of just trying to match one by one and make this thing happen, actually build sort of a public facing program around it that's around that business or that industry need, that through that need serves the job seekers we're trying to serve who have been displaced and dislocated. Check back with us in a couple of months or at the end of this program year to see how successful we are with that, but that's kind of the idea there.
Tracey just reminded me of something also that, this program got a lot of attention at the state level from the governor's office, and certainly the elected officials were really excited about it. And knowing, in San Diego, the tourism and restaurant industry and, is just so critical to our economy. And so people really like seeing that. What was interesting was also at the state level, our analysts for the WIOA funds, not as excited. They were a little more hesitant of, well, wait a minute, is this, are we using layoff aversion funds? Because this wasn't exactly a layoff. They had a notice that they're, because they would be laid off, but they weren't yet. And there were just some things that we had to work out there and sort of build trust and just really make sure we were to the letter of the law to both the state policies, but our own internal policies, and we were updating everything and communicating everything. And so I think it's always interesting when people are touting a program and it's so amazing, and then behind it gets poked at quite a bit. So yeah. Just always good to have your I's dotted and your T's crossed, and
I'll say it again, it was not an easy thing to do. And so like Mikey, who's the director of One Fair Wage and who piloted with our restaurant here in San Diego. I think there are something like 40, I should know this, 40 something workforce development boards in California. And he was only successful, and he was trying to scale this program to other cities. And I think had the High Road Kitchen program launched in San Francisco and Sacramento, but had a really, really hard time until we sort of figured out some of those things and were willing to do the work with the policy board and all those other things. Didn't have a model, different boards didn't know how to navigate it. And so it's hard because it takes a lot of effort, and it takes maybe some vision and a little bit of passion and a little bit of like, let's stop asking why we can't, let's start asking why can't we. And so yeah, we ended up providing, I think, some of those lessons learned to some of the other workforce boards in California. And I think that's been helpful, but also encountered a lot of folks that didn't have necessarily the same flexibility or the same support from leadership. And that's another thing, is we had a lot of leadership support and executive support. And because we also had sort of we were kind of leading that effort and got some press around it, and Governor Gavin Newsom was all about it. And I think that he was, we had sort of Mikey had an in with the governor's office. And so there were a lot of things that aligned. And that also contributed to our success. It wasn't just us deciding to do it and then going and doing it. Had to have a lot of support.
So this has been, I think, a really interesting overlay here of an initiative that you guys have clearly demonstrated in your presentation, was a response to an issue that you saw in your own local area. Of course, many of us saw the same issue, that you responded to in partnership with industry, and sort of organized an industry partnership that created some champions within it that identified the opportunity, and then you took the resources of the public system and then some private resources to help bolster the capacity to move it forward. That's a beautiful explanation of how OJT gets applied in a way that is really truly finessed, and it sounds like you're going to take that now and scale it to other industries. And we're excited to hear more about how that process goes for you. One of the things I keyed in on at the very end there, Rachel, is that leadership was key. And so we're going to go next to our friends at Partner for Work. And I think that one of the things that has been transformational in the Pittsburgh region has been the restructuring of this organization as it brought new leadership in under Earl Buford's tenure there. And he has really been able to connect all the dots in the Pittsburgh region and set the organization and that local area up for really dynamic and purposeful services that help connect people back to employment, and the results are beginning to show for themselves. But Jack, you also then brought your extensive experience with industry partnerships and some of the tenets of industry partnership that were critical to making some of those changes happen. And you guys are now moving all of those planning, that planning time forward. So talk a little bit about how OJT fits into that and where you guys are headed with it.
So I'll do that, but first of all, I just want to say that was a great presentation from the San Diego Workforce Board. You know, it brought two things to mind. One is the intentionality, really knowing what you wanted to do, and then innovation. I loved it. So you guys set a high bar. So I want to talk about our structure for Partner for Work, with the Workforce Board for Pittsburgh, so a city, but also for Allegheny County, which is a lot of small cities, but a pretty rural area as well, pretty big mix. Just to reference what Tracey said, about 18 months ago, we had, and this is before my time, we brought in a new CEO, Earl Buford, who'd come from the Milwaukee Workforce Board. And he brought several things, and this was also emphasized by a transition committee that we developed. First of all, to really have stronger employer engagement. Second of all, to start to to build relationships with labor, with unions and labor management partnerships. And third of all, to really address job quality and diversity and equity and inclusion in a way that the Workforce Board had not before, being much more intentional about that. So a means of getting at all of that had to do with building out industry partnerships. And so we've been about that for the time ever since Earl came, and I was lucky enough to come onto the staff to work with Earl. Having said that, Pennsylvania, which is our state, makes it very, very clear that workforce boards are not about providing any direct services. And so when we think about how we actually get jobs done, you know, how we actually provide services to people and also to employers, it's about our American Job Centers. It's about contracts with them and with our Title I staff there. It's about contracting with others, both on the business services side, but also on the out-of-school youth and in-school youth. We have TANF as well as WIOA funding. We have grants for serving people with criminal justice system involvement. And it's drawing all that kind of funding together, but providing the services through those contracts by and large. What we do internally is we do employer engagement. So it's not the business services exactly, but instead building relationships with employers and identifying as a group what their priorities are and what the priorities for their industries are. So I want to then start with our current practices on the job training. And you know, our on the job training is about employer commitments, developing and adhering to a training plan, and being responsive to our American Job Centers. In Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania, we call them career links, to make a good faith effort with the individual who has the on-the-job training, and then to provide continued employment and to provide equal compensation as other employees, including benefits, equal working conditions, and then to retain people for at least 6 months after they end their OJT. That gives you a basic structure. Just as some of the chat has gone on, we pay 50% of the self-sufficiency wage in our area. So in our area, for an individual, that's $15.34 an hour. So we'll pay the employer half of that. And then the maximum amount that an employee can be earning to qualify in our area for on-the-job training is $20 an hour. You get some sense of where that on-the-job training works for us. We can provide as much as $10,000 to support an OJT. They don't all end up at that expense, obviously enough. And just a little bit about our track record. We changed who it was that was our provider of Workforce Investment Act adult and dislocated services, or our Title I provider, in the year from July 19 to June of 20. And so as a result of that change, our OJTs went down. We had 34 OJTs approved in that year. And probably the most were in construction and manufacturing. We also had some in maintenance and repair, and some in sales and administrative services. We did have one apprenticeship in the maintenance and repair area. So this year, COVID has really reduced the number of OJTs. So far we've had 12 approved, and they're mostly, again, in construction and manufacturing. We do have one each in sales and also administrative services. Most of our OJTs come, as what was mentioned before in San Diego, as reverse referrals. That is, the employer wants to hire somebody, but that person isn't really up to all of the job requirements, and they need some additional training. And when I say it's a team sport, for us, we have a complex set of roles, both at the Career Link, the American Job Center, and at our industry partnership staff, and also with our program staff. And so just to talk that out a little bit, for our program team, they're responsible for all the contracts that I mentioned, except for our business engagement contracts. And so they work with our career links, they work with all of the providers that we have involved. And so they play a crucial role in making sure the money is there at the career links for the OJTs. And they also are involved in the approval process. For the strategy team, the team that I am responsible for, we're all about employer engagement. And so we're out there talking to employers about what their needs are and how OJT could be a potential tool to meet those needs. And that also goes for our relationships with unions, because if a union contract if an employer has a union contract, that really is helpful, because the union can bring in the question of whether an OJT would be good in their workplace and encourage the employer on that score. So then with the American Job Centers, with our career links, so we have two, one for the city and one for the county, and they're actually the ones who approve the on-the-job training contracts, and they do a lot of the paperwork as well. And so they have the money in their contracts, and we give each of them about $100,000 a year to start. To go beyond that, sometimes we have grant sources, or sometimes we have additional, we owe them money if they're close to using up that 100,000. So with that said, this idea of going to your organization's priorities. So for Partner for Work, our priorities for on-the-job trainings are to look at the level of the employer need, to emphasize on new hires versus existing employees, to look at the quality of the training plan, to look at opportunities for advancement, and also what we think of as the strategic value of an employer. We have an employer that's part of an industry partnership, or one that we work with on employing people in criminal justice, who have criminal justice backgrounds. We're gonna try to do more for an employer that really aligns with what we're trying to get done. One thing that I heard from San Diego is this need to identify where there are policy challenges and try to overcome them. So one area for us in terms of flexibility of policy, we can waive policies that we ourselves set. And so just as an example of that, we have a policy that typically restricts employers to 4 on-the-job trainings. And that's because they're expensive. And so we don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket, if you will. But if we find an employer who's really providing a good level of compensation, a job that has good quality, an advancement pathway for our people, we'll move that only 4 idea, because it's a win-win. It's a win for what we're trying to get done, and it's a win for the employer who's got a good opportunity for our people. I want to turn to future plans. I haven't talked about the industry partnerships yet, because pretty much so far our relationships around OJT have been one-offs. It's not that the employers aren't in industry partnerships. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But we really want to leverage our industry partnerships much more. The whole idea of finding champions, we use the concept of business champions all over the industry partnerships, particularly around what the priorities the employers define for their industries. But we like the idea of using employer champions who have a little experience under their belt with OJTs to, help us convince other employers in the industry partnership that it's a good thing for them too. And we see that as a real channel for us to broaden the opportunities. I also think we can do more with labor, and particularly in construction, to see the role of OJTs in helping to support apprentices and provide for the on-the-job learning component of apprenticeships, but also more generally in unions where they have good relationships with the employers. even if they don't use a apprenticeship model. And then last but not least, we use transitional jobs to some extent, but we're trying to be more intentional about transitional jobs. And we're starting to develop a model. This is conceptual stage rather than something we've implemented yet, but a stage where we start people off in a transitional job and then move them to an on-the-job training opportunity, so they're moving into what can be a permanent job for them via reduced wages and a training component being the bridge for somebody to leave the transitional job opportunity and get into permanent employment. So that's a little bit about where we're going. Tracey, you're muted.
I'm muted. I am muted. But now I'm not. So thank you, Jack. I really do appreciate you taking the time here to share more about what's happening in the Pittsburgh region. And we're going to move now to Kansas City and the Full Employment Council. And so we'll come back to Shelley and she'll give a presentation here along with Rowena. And I believe we need to switch this out. Is that right, Ro? You guys want to pull up your own? Okay.
Yeah, we're going to share a screen here.
All right, so Amber's getting that set up. And while that's happening, I just wanted to tee you up, Shelley or Ro, whoever wants to answer it. Both Jack and the folks in San Diego have answered the question about the structure of OJTs with the 50% reimbursement, et cetera. Could you guys talk about a little bit before you head into this, how you guys structure those agreements?
Yeah, this is Shelley. We actually, depending on the size, and this is a state mandate, depends on the amount of reimbursements. For smaller companies, we can go up to 100%, but typically we focus at the 50% amount. The other thing is the on-the-job training is just one of our work-based learning activities. And so I think, and as we go through our presentations, I can show you where we're connecting OJTs with work experience, with internships, and then with apprenticeship activities. But typically the target is about 50%.
Okay, thanks, Shelley.
You ready, Rowena?
Can you see my screen?
I can't see it.
We did, and now it's.
Can you see it?
Yep, we can.
Now we see it. Yep, there it is.
So the Full Employment Council is the, we staff 2 workforce boards, one in Eastern Jackson County and the other in the Kansas City and vicinity area. We serve 5 counties, Ray, Clay, Platte, Cass, and Jackson County. And in a nutshell, our job is to help businesses find candidates to fill their workforce needs. We work with both public and private sector employers. And this is our region. What's unique about our service delivery area is that you have urban, suburban, and rural counties. And because of that, we utilize local data to help us pinpoint or identify our strategic sector strategies. Some of the areas, as an example, in Platte and Clay, there are a lot of advanced manufacturing plants out there. In Ray County, you have more of warehouse, transportation, logistics. Jackson County and Cass, there's a combination of all of those things. And so we, again, utilize labor market information to focus our staff's efforts and, you know, target the various sectors in the counties that we serve. One of the things that we try to do, and just to go back, we're also the fiscal agent, but we also provide services. So we're a little unique there. Our business services team is made up of Full Employment Council staff, Division of Workforce Development staff, vocational rehabilitation staff, and then rehabilitation for the blind staff. So we have a team of workforce job developers. And again, our goal was to eliminate duplication, but also create a single point of contact. We didn't want everyone and their brother calling on one employer. And so we followed that rule. And if there's an employer that as an example, someone from I'm sorry, about 5 horses just walked past my windows and I'm on a street, that's weird. But anyway, we have, if the Full Employment Council is working with an employer and we've developed a relationship, then the other entities will not touch that employer and vice versa. So it's just that respect, reduction of duplication, and then again, to create that single point of contact. Our ultimate objective is to create what we call a single first source agreement. And what that is where employers will agree to work with our business services team for any future or current workforce needs that they have. And that's our ultimate goal, to establish that agreement. Our sectors are advanced manufacturing, IT, warehouse logistics, healthcare, finance, construction, and business services. All of our sectors, we have identified intermediaries. So we have KC Tech Council as an example for IT. For healthcare, we work with the Missouri Health Hospital Association. But ultimately, their role in this is to be as a connector. They bring their members to the workforce board. And from there, we provide an overview of our services and try to connect as many OJTs, internships, apprenticeships as we can. In addition to that connection, our role is to facilitate a discussion with the training providers and the employers to come up with a customized training opportunity. I think someone from San Diego, might have been Jack, go back, Rowena, that mentioned that you have employers with like skills at the same table. We do something similar. So if we're working with the IT company as an example, and they say to us, we're needing software developers, but we can't compete with some of these big companies, or folks that are graduating with 4-year degrees are not wanting to take our jobs because the pay is not as competitive as that of a larger company. What we've done is organize these employer groups, have them to prescribe the curriculum, identify those key skill sets that job seekers will need. And we take that information and we connect it to training providers. In some instances, we've had employers provide adjunct professors. And I'll use, again, the IT example. A lot of our schools could not provide those just-in-time, non-semester-based training scenarios. And so with employers providing their staff, and with the schools putting them under their umbrella as adjunct professors, we were able to create fast-track, just-in-time, non-semester-based training programs. And I apologize. In addition to IT, we sat down with all of the sectors, had about 140 hours of listening sessions where we asked questions about their needs, their concerns, the opportunities that they had presently, what they would have in the future. And again, our job or our goal was to align their current and future needs with that of the training. And so one of the, I would call it a best practice, is this customized training curriculum that we put together. Once you have that customized training curriculum, in some instances, we refer to it as pre-apprenticeship activities. So the classroom training acted as the pre-apprenticeship, the classroom training. And then once they went to work, we called it an on-the-job training. And together, those two things resulted in apprenticeships. That was a piece that we did, I would say, outside of the WIOA dollars. As you know, it's highly restricted. We've utilized some of our discretionary grants to have a little bit more flexibility. And anytime you commingle WIOA with any DOL funding or special grant, then WIOA tends to take over. And some of these special initiatives, we were looking to rapidly connect, rapidly have completers, and rapidly enroll people into, on-the-job training activities, internships, work experience, et cetera. I want to go back a little bit. I think the one thing that we did well, and I'll say over the last 2 years, we've had 165 OJTs, just to give you an example of the numbers that we have. But going out to employers, the minute we talk about programs, it turns folks off. And so our focus was, what are the services that we can provide as the public workforce system? One would be the recruiting piece. The first question was, where do the people come from? Well, we would say they can come from you. You can refer some folks. We could do community recruitment. We can source our existing existing pool of applicants to see what we have there. And somebody mentioned incumbent worker training. For us, we never would do OJT with incumbent workers, but we would give incumbent workers an opportunity to skill up. And so if you have a widget maker 1 and you're needing widget maker 2s, we would, through this customized classroom training development, provide these fast track scenarios where you could refer existing or your incumbent workers if you would like to. You need to probably go back one Rowena. I think the other thing with the apprenticeships, and again, I hate to distinguish between apprenticeships, OJT, or internships. All of them are work-based learning activities. The sale of these activities are not the subsidies. We have found that employers can care less about being reimbursed for, up to 50%. What they want to see is that upfront human resource activities that we provide. The mass recruitment, I'll use Ford Motor Company, and that was one of Rowena's employers. They wanted 300 people to make applications, and I think they were going to hire 150. We recruited 1,500, and they ended up hiring 300. And that group of people we directed to other employers. But my point is, we wanted to show them that we could deliver the masses, that we could deliver the numbers. The other thing they wanted to know is, about basic skills. What was the reading or math level? So we conducted assessments up front. Anytime we refer you someone, you knew, what their experience was, what were their basic literacy. We would do a work keys assessments to determine if this was the correct field or a field of interest. So we brought a candidate to them that was ready to go to work. The other thing was organizing hiring events or referral processes. Here recently, we've done a lot of virtual activities, but in the past, we would have employers come on site and conduct, interviews. And again, our goal was always to refer three people for every one position that they had. And again, the volume, the quality of the candidate was what the employer was most interested in. And then, by the way, if they qualified, and we never tagged anyone, so to speak. And so when you interviewed, say, 100 people, you didn't know who was eligible for OJT, internships, work experience, apprenticeships. All you knew was that you were getting a qualified applicant. And then once the selection was made, then we would tell you, okay, Rowena is eligible for OJT, or Tracey is eligible for work experience, or Jack is eligible for an apprenticeship, or Shelley comes with nothing. There's no subsidy, but you still got a qualified applicant. So I would say, as you go out, promoting the services is key. Showing the employer that the public workforce system can deliver on masses. And we're not just your entry-level referring system. We can identify people that, someone mentioned, I think it was Shaina that mentioned dislocated workers. We would promote that six-figure project manager that needed employment. And so as we go out, of course, our efforts are targeted. And I say that to say we're taking people that have graduated from our system, or folks that are in our system looking for employment, and find jobs that line up with those, versus the other way around. Sometimes when you get job orders and you bring them in, it's not a fit. So when we do subsidized employment, we're doing a targeted effort that aligns, and I think Jack mentioned, with their skills and abilities, talking about the job seeker. We look at the difficulty of the job. We look at the previous work experience or credential that the client has. And from there, we target the employers. I think the other thing that is critical, our approach is more of a sales. It's more of a sales of services versus programs. We don't talk about WIOA. We don't talk about the rules and the regulations. We don't talk about a contract. Whatever we do is a memorandum of understanding. And then from there, we develop what we call an employment training strategy. And there we lay out what the employers are asking from the public workforce system. And we address ways in which we will meet those needs or expectations. And so the contract is scary language. We get away from that. There's no guarantee. We refer you clients that meet your minimum standards. And if they happen to be eligible for on-the-job training, then that's what you get. And that's more or less our approach with employers. And again, from our experience, employers are looking for a qualified applicant. Just to throw out some more numbers, we've had 95 apprenticeships, over 100 internships that we turned into full-time employment. With our youth internships, we use those to really, again, buy down the cost to train, but also to give the youth the opportunity to gain marketable skills. And so whenever we place them with the employer, we're usually negotiating a full-time employment opportunity. But if the employer says, hey, I don't have the funds, and it's just to gain work experience, then we not only let the job seeker know, but we work with the other employers to get this person placed after they gain this marketable work experience. I don't know, I've kind of jumped all over the place. I'm trying to keep from coughing, Tracey. If I had a key takeaway, I wouldn't go in talking about programs. Anybody knows Clyde McQueen, that's my boss. He hates programs. If we mention it, he's, don't talk about programs. But we talk about the services. We talk about being an extension of your HR department. We talk about delivering the masses. We don't do a cattle call. That means we don't post a job and let anybody and everybody come in. We do a thorough review, assessment. We look at their skill sets. We do a preliminary screen. So anybody that gets through to that employer meets their requirements, their minimum requirements.
Well, Shelley, I think we can save your voice at this point.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you. I was excited to have you guys join us because I know that you guys have been deeply engaged in OJT as a tool for quite some time. And your staff, I've had the benefit of being able to interact with a lot of workforce boards over the last couple of years. And I have never encountered a staff with as much tenure and as deep a bench as Full Employment Council has. And
Thank you.
That's a testament to the leadership that you bring. So certainly glad to have you here to share how you guys implement this this tool we call on the job training. And so with that, I do want to open it up to some questions and answers. We have probably about 10 minutes or so, 12 minutes or so for some questions and answers. And I think we did have some stuff that was posted in the chat room. And so one of the questions is whether or not there's a certain number of applicants that would need to be required in order to enter into a contract with an employer. Do you guys have any policies around that locally?
This is Shelley. When we develop our memorandum of understanding, we'll put up to 20, and there's no requirement of the employer. The money is somewhat obligated. I think a period of 6 months or shorter, depending on their hire date. And then after that, we'll de-op, or the actual hiring triggers the funding, if that makes sense. So there's no minimum, but there is a maximum allowed per employer.
So you guys, Shaina, you guys were talking a bit about started taking a bit of a cohort approach, and so how did that work? Did you guys establish any requirements around the number of employees that would need to be re-engaged as part of that look at quality?
Go ahead, Rachel.
I'm not sure if I'll directly answer that question, but Shaina and I worked together to make sure that we allocated a certain amount of funds that we knew from our WIOA funding would go towards OJTs, and then we could kind of reverse engineer then how many participants we could serve out of that, and that gave us a baseline understanding about sort of how we could monitor and make sure that we were enrolling the right number of folks. I feel like that may be half the answer you're looking for.
So there's another question. Yeah, that was really helpful. So there's another question here about developing a toolkit. That's one of the takeaways that MUS intends to do and make available to its members. And it sounds like between the San Diego Workforce Partnership and Full Employment Council, you guys might already have some of the makings of that. Have you guys organized that in any way formally in terms of an actual toolkit? And Rachel and Shaina, you guys are starting to roll this out to new industries. How are you packaging that so that you don't have to recreate the wheel each time?
I may have gotten a little, my intention is to begin exploring rolling out with other industries in a cohort approach. We're still in kind of baby steps there. And I think that developing a successful cohort approach program has a couple of different considerations. One is our businesses have to be hiring and or bringing people back to work. And so finding the right industries that have that kind of hiring need at some level of scale, as well as knowing how you can match the folks in the program with that need, and if there's tangential things. We've also done similar things where we're working with an individual employer who has a need to hire, say, an ongoing number of, but we don't use OJT for that, so I don't know if I should mention that even. As far as a tool, I mean, that was helpful for the using hybrid kitchens as an example. We did develop a toolkit that was specific to the restaurant industry, and that included, you know, like an intro document. This is what to expect from the process. These are the steps that you'll go through. These are the different points of contact you might have, because it wasn't just a single point of contact, because we had to, you know, team effort and all that. And these are the things that you can expect. And that included links to like a template training plan, the application, and some things just to make it easy, because we found that having sort of a package of documents all at once to give to an employer was helpful, as opposed to going back and forth and finding new things. And oh, by the way, you have to fill out this form as well, now that we're 2 weeks down the road. So I think that it depends on from the business side of things, it depends on kind of what you need in order to get them on board and communicate with them. And then Shaina, I don't know if you have anything to add as far as a toolkit from just general OJT enrollment side.
No, I think what we found was what we have is very BOS speak. And so ironically, I think we probably used it for this project. We recently had another employer that reached out to us and wanted to hire 20 or 30 employees. It was a great opportunity. They were sort of interested in OJT, not so sure. And when we said, oh, let's send them our document that we, you know, that kind of outlines the process of what it would look like for them, we all pulled it up and said, oh yeah, that's not going to convince them that they'll want to be a part of this. We need to, hang on, let me just pull a few bullets out. And, you know, we needed like the soft toe in the water so that we could get them hooked a little bit and see the benefits, and then have them say, okay, yeah, that seems like it would be worthwhile. And then give them the flow chart that has all the boxes and the forms and all of that. So, and that just happened in the last 2 weeks. So I think we're still just learning. You know, we think we have this document we can share, and then we go to share it and we realize, oh, that will be overwhelming.
So that, go ahead, Jack.
So I actually think there are two different kinds of toolkits. And, you know, we have a flyer that we use with employers, and that comes from the career link to make it possible for them to know who to talk to there. For what our employer engagement staff need, our industry partnership staff, the key is to make sure that their role, the program team role, and the career link or American Job Center role are clearly defined, so that we don't try to duplicate, and we don't try to we don't end up confusing employers about, you know, how this actually goes. So I'd say a toolkit for staff, so each knows who, you know, what their role is pretty clearly, and then also minimal materials. Not a lot of words, certainly not at the beginning, much in detail for employers. You know, it's our job to make it simple for them.
I think that that's what I keep seeing pop up here in the chat. There's a real interest around, how to make this language simple for employers so it's not a turnoff. There is a question about, Shelley, you mentioned not using the word program. And I think that folks who work in workforce development, we establish a lexicon that we all are comfortable with, and we share this language, and it sort of gives us a certain amount of cachet, right? Because we know what OJT means. We can say OJT and we know what that means, right?
Right.
But it separates us from our employers or from our training partners or others in the community. So oftentimes we do use it, and so it's really unlearning that process. How have you worked on that with your staff to help them really kind of develop a new way of languaging our services in a way that's appropriate to the intended audience?
I think if you go back to the toolkit, we actually have brochures and flyers that gives a generic overview of the services, and I keep stressing services. And then the individual job developer, say Rowena, when she goes out to present to an employer, it's customized when we develop that employment and training strategy. And so there's this generic list. It's kind of like a menu of services, like you go in a restaurant. These are all the things you get if you do this and do that. And it explains it, but what you need for your workforce is something totally different from someone else. And so when we present that memorandum of understanding or that employment and training strategy, it's customized to that employer. And I think it's less confusion when you have that one person. And I know that some places can't do that, but the more we bring into it, the more complicated it becomes. So that single point of contact to explain the OJT agreement, to explain the 50% reimbursement, to explain the monitoring that has to incur, to explain the wage gain if it's an apprenticeship, to explain the career ladder, which in apprenticeships we write that out, we spell it out. So to have that individual explain it and also present it in their presentation, as we agree to pursue or to go forward with you, these are the things that we'll do. And it's a lot more clear, but we do have a menu of services. We have found leaving it with the employer, there's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And so to be there and to be able to answer them has just worked better for us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that there's a lot of interest as well in perhaps sharing the resources. And so if you guys are willing, we didn't plan this, but maybe we'll ask if we could organize the documents that you guys use, your sort of white box, Shelley, that you referenced, that is just sort of the generic language about it. And then maybe a sample of the more specific plan that you would put together for an employer, so that people just start to see how you deepen the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Of that, that process of developing the OJT as sort of the strategy to move people through into a deeper relationship with you.
And I will say we were guilty of the program presentations, 10 years ago. And through focus groups and through conversations with employers, they were like, just tell me in layman's terms, what are you talking about? What's in it for me? Right. That's all they want to know. What's in it for them? And then all this other junk, we'll take care of it.
Right. We can be the ones with our hearts on our sleeves, and they just want to know how does it affect their bottom line, right? Yeah. So Rachel and Shaina, it would be really fantastic if you guys were willing to sort of share some of the templating that you've come up with for the restaurant industry in particular. Now, some of that's nuanced to the San Diego region in particular, but it would allow us to see the components of it that might be useful in other parts of the country. So if we would be willing to sort of enter into a resource share, and we could, MUS would be willing to bundle those as we're building out this toolkit that we would make available to others. And then same with Partner for Work. Jack, I'm curious if you have seen examples of sort of that white box idea that have grown out of industry partnerships. And if you might have some ideas or examples that we could put into this packet that would help industry partnerships actually dig into the practice of using OJTs within that industry. So that's the ask. If you guys are willing to share that, we will make that available to the group here, as well as this recording. So this has been recorded. We will make this recording available to you. If you're interested, send an email to Amber and she will get that out to you. It will also be hosted on our we have a YouTube channel now. I feel very cool because we have one of those. So the video will be posted on the YouTube channel, and so you can go ahead and view it there, or send your staff to that location to take a look at it. I want to thank all of our presenters. You guys did a fantastic job of laying out how to use this tool, giving us some resources. What we have here is the contact information for each person. So if you want to reach out to them individually, you can do that through this information. We will also be sending out a survey because we want to understand whether we met your expectations today, and how we met them, and how we can continue to improve. Lastly, I just wanted to give a shout out. So we are hosting our next monthly Zoominar session focused on the intersection of community college and university partnerships with the public workforce system and workforce development boards. Oftentimes there are some somewhat contentious relationships between those entities. And so we want to talk about why it's hard and what we can do together to make the relationship better. So that is tomorrow from 9 to 10:30. So if you have not yet seen that and are interested in joining us for that conversation, please reach out and Amber can share that invitation as well. Last but not least, I want to say thank you to Amber. She's been fantastic with getting this all organized and set up and keeping us all on time and honest and directed. So with that, thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.
Bye.